copy of a copy of a copy of a copy copy. Deja vu.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. For season 1, we're discussing The Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 28, titled A Nice Place to Visit. And A Nice Place to Visit was originally aired on April 15th, 1960. It was directed by John Brahm, written by Charles Beaumont. Those names should be very familiar to you, Mark. And it stars Larry Blyden, Sebastian Cabot, and John Close.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and suddenly up ahead. Just cross over. You're moving into a land, another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
And here is Rod Serling's opening voiceover from A Nice Place to Visit. Portrait of a man at work, the only work he's ever done, the only work he knows. His name is Henry Francis Valentine, but he calls himself Rocky because that's the way his life has been. Rocky and perilous and uphill at a dead run all the way. He's tired now, tired of running or wanting, of waiting for the breaks that come to others but never to him, never to Rocky Valentine. A scared, angry little man. He thinks it's all over now, but he's wrong. For Rocky Valentine, it's just the beginning.
And from IMDb, the description of this episode: when bad guy Henry Francis Valentine dies in a shootout with police, which is very topical, he wakes up in the next world where his every wish is granted forever, comma, and ever.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, and for the, one listener out there who doesn't watch the Twilight Zone episodes before listening to this podcast, it's important to know the job he's at the beginning is he's like committing a crime. He's robbing, I think, a jewelry store.
Yeah, because he drops it.
And then kind of during the voiceover, there's like a little break and he like runs out and there's some police cars coming. He like runs into an alley and tries to escape and shoots at them and they shoot at him and he like falls down dead. And that's kind of the end of the opening segment. And then when we come back is when he's in this afterlife-y type place.
To be a little bit even more clear about it, he robs a jewelry store, because I laughed at this, because remember in Vacation when Chevy Chase is walking through the desert and he's like taking off different articles of clothing and then he takes off his watch like he's too hot to wear his watch and throws it on the ground. It's a great moment. So as Rocky Valentine is running away, you already robbed the jewelry store. He like throws down the jewelry and runs like that's going to help him move faster. And this I'm sure we'll discuss in detail in a little bit. The cops shoot at him very quickly without verifying that he has done anything wrong, robbed a jewelry store. There's an alarm going off. There's one guy outside of it, and the cops very quickly shoot at him. He then does, you're right, shoot back and gets killed. Going back to our opener, though, John Brahm, do you recognize any of his? He directed 12 total episodes of Twilight Zone.
He's a favorite of ours.
Yes.
Charles Beaumont, I also remembered seeing as a writer, although I didn't remember which episodes he had written. But Brahm, I know, did, I think what still remains our only 5-star episode, which was
Judgment Night.
I'm like, the one with the boat and the submarine.
Right. So he also had done...
I'm like Homer, where there was the bus, and if its speed went below 50, then it would
it had
blow
to
up.
Speed
So it had to speed down the road and keep its speed high. I think it was called The Bus That Couldn't Slow Down.
He also did Time Enough at Last, which we liked.
Which we also liked. Yeah.
He did The Four of Us Are Dying, which we didn't like as much.
But we thought was generally well directed. There were some neat little camera tricks in that, not the like weird superimpositions at the end, but some of the ones where his face changed like mid shot with, a clever camera movement were good. Were you looking, I went back and actually looked after I saw at the end that it had been directed by John Brahm. I went back and looked for matte paintings because I did not notice any.
I did not even think of it. I didn't notice them either.
The only one I thought, like, where I went back and looked, I'm like, well, maybe that would have been was when they're going to like the big filing cabinet in the sky, literally.
Oh, yeah.
And remember when they get to the top, there's like, you can see this, then there's like another tier of stairs and file cabinets. And I thought maybe that was a matte painting, so I should go back and look. But I don't think it was. But if it was a much better done matte painting than we've seen in a couple other Brom episodes.
Agreed. Then the other one that we've seen of Brom to this point, other than this one, would be a mirror image, which I think
that was also John Brom. I didn't remember that.
And I think we had more issues with kind of the silliness of it and the bad, after Serling had called out how he could write for women, the bad portrayal of women. I think that kind of maybe tainted our view of that episode a little bit. And there was just obviously some weird plot holes, but I don't think the direction was bad. I thought there was I think we even called out Brom for some neat things that he did in that episode.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where, TV world is a little different than film world. In film, look, all these are huge generalizations because there's, films and TV shows that work in all sorts of different models. But to generalize, in film, we think of the director as sort of the key creative force. And in TV, traditionally, it's the writers. So if you think particularly like a long running show, like a sitcom or drama, that Twilight Zone is a little weird because it's an anthology series. The writers are the ones who determine the arc of the show and have kind of final creative say, and the directors are the ones who come in, and their job is to, help things get punched up as well as they can with that material and make sure everyone hits their marks and they get the right angles and stuff. But if you come into season 4 of a show, the actors know those characters better than you just in there for the week do. So you're not really shaping the characters as much and other things. The reason I'm getting to this is in terms of Twilight Zone, it's very clearly Rod Serling's show. He's the showrunner. He, writes just about every episode, although not this one, but certainly would have final say on what episodes get made and kind of what the overall arc is. So when we think of the director for the Twilight Zone episodes, at least what I think of and what I'm looking for in terms of whether it was well directed is, given the material they had, how did they choose to shoot it? How was the pacing? How were the camera angles? Did they do the best they could with the material? And I think even in Mirror Image, which we had issues with the story and particularly with the Serling sort of calling out, this is going to be my episode showing I can write for women, and then it is not. But, even in Mirror Image, I thought it was what was done with the material was generally done well. And I think this for me, I guess, spoiler alert, is going to be a little in the same category. I liked most of how it was shot and executed. I just did not like this story of this episode. I didn't think had a lot of meat to it.
Yeah, and I even remember little things like Mirror Image. I think I called out the fact that the clock was progressing in actual time, and it almost felt like a real-time episode. So yeah, I didn't have any issues with the way it was directed and what he did with the material, but I do agree that the material in this was weaker. So Charles Beaumont, the ones we've seen from him, the writer, Perchance to Dream, which I think we were okay with. Elegy, we were okay with. Long Live Walter Jameson, which I loved and you liked. And then this is the fourth one we've seen of him. He has an awful lot. I can't even count these, but he has an awful lot of writing credits for the Twilight Zone. So,
well, and I think we talked about that Twilight Zone doesn't use a lot of different writers. Over the course of the first season, I think we're going to end up having seen, 4 writers, with Serling being, 3/4 of the episode and the other 3 combining for just a few. I guess what strikes me as interesting about that is, if you have a show where there's like a lot of writers and kind of, every episode's a different writer, you expect a lot of variation. If you're only going to use a couple other writers and Serling's going to kind of write most of them himself, it would just seem to me, and this is maybe just a projection, I'm imagining if I'm Serling and I think I can write well, which he can write well, and I'm going to write all these episodes, the only time I'm going to let somebody else come in is if they are just like the shit, like they're going to write an amazing episode. And so, okay, I'm not going to write that one because I can. And I don't know that we've seen that out of Beaumont. I wouldn't say he's written bad episodes, but I don't notice that they're particularly, better.
Stand out.
Yeah. Like it's not like wow, I can see why Serling wanted to bring this person in to write, I don't know. And that sounds like a knock on Beaumont. Like you said, several of the episodes we've seen have been sort of fine, but none of them, other than Walter Jameson, which I know you loved, and I also liked a lot. I think we ended up giving that like 4.5 stars.
I think so.
The other three at this point, the first two you mentioned and this one, I have found mediocre.
Agreed.
And that just kind of strikes me that, Serling would hand off writing duties to somebody else who's going to write mediocre episodes. And I would think if I'm him, like, well, shit, I can crank out a mediocre episode myself. Like, I mean, he can also crank out good ones. I'm not saying that, but like, it doesn't seem like it's like, wow, I really need somebody else to come in and do this one to really knock it out of the park.
Well, and just looking at the ones ahead that we haven't seen of Beaumont, no name stands out to me. So that kind of strikes me. I mean, if I, Terror at whatever it is, 13,000 feet or whatever that one is, I think I would recognize
the name really sticking out at you.
Well, you know what I mean? So I don't see one that's coming up that maybe that's what we should do. We'll finish season 1 and then we'll only watch Charles Beaumont episodes. I would also like to point out that we've seen Brom several times and Beaumont several times. This is the first one that it's the two of them collaborating together.
Okay. That's worth noting.
Yeah.
I think, Mike, before we get too much into this episode, I would
let's not bother. We're only 10 minutes in. Let's not.
Well, let's talk about some other things, though, and maybe this will be another episode where we get 20 minutes into the podcast before spending a whole lot of time in the episode, which is fine with me because I don't have a ton to say about this. But
me neither.
Yeah, I will say so. For our listeners, we record thanks largely to me being incompetent at scheduling and always like flaking out and changing schedule at the last minute. We don't record on a super regular schedule. So even though we air weekly, sometimes we're knocking out a couple episodes in a week. Sometimes there's a gap of a couple weeks when we don't get a chance to record. And it just so happens that we've been in a gap where, gosh, kind of a lot's happened in the world. And, I think our last episode kind of posted right as the George Floyd protests were beginning, and we had recorded it almost a week earlier. So this is kind of 2 weeks in now that we're recording this one, which will now have to air quickly because I couldn't get around to recording until late. So Mike's gonna have to crank through the editing. Thanks, Mike.
That's all right, no problem.
But anyway, so I've been thinking obviously as a lot of people are doing about everything going on. Surrounding George Floyd and the protests and everything. And I have to say it's made me, I think there's definitely some fruitful conversation we can have about this episode and maybe bringing in some stuff about our last one as well. But it's made me think, and one of the things I honestly, Mike, feel kind of weird about is it's sort of a privileged thing. Like there's all this stuff going on and real serious problems people being dealt with, and we're like, let's talk about this 60-year-old TV show as two white guys. And so I guess one thing that I just wanted to, whatever small forum this might be, is to point people to listening to some other things and reading other things, seeking out other sources. I just read a thing the other day about look at your bookshelf and see what kind of writers you're reading, and are they all people who look and sound like you, are from similar backgrounds as you? And if they are, whatever, whoever you may be, read some books coming from different people. If you're listening to podcasts, listen to podcasts by some different people about some things that aren't all your pet things, and kind of broaden your horizons and the perspectives, and just listen to other voices. And there's one article, and I know Michael put this out in the show notes, that I'd like to point to. I saw a post and I just thought it was really powerful. And it was on the onbeing.org, written by Lori Lakin Hutcherson, and published a few years ago, sadly, in response to yet another or a previous killing of a Black person by the police. But it's called "What I Said When My White Friend Asked for My Black Opinion on White Privilege." I saw that. Yeah, I think if you haven't read this, I think it's a really great read for anybody. And I will say myself, one of the things that really kind of hit a nerve with for me is a lot of times, I think I have an intellectual understanding of what white privilege is. And this really brought it to a very personal level and understanding. And I think one of the misconceptions, we often have, and I will say myself when when I'm not thinking deeply about it, is we think of this as sort of a positive action instead of I don't mean positive in the sense of good, but like an actual action as opposed to a lack of action. And what I mean is, you might think of white privilege as, oh, you get something special because you are white. And what I think this does a really good job hammering in on is all the things that just you take for granted that don't happen to you because you're white. And that's a really important, I think, distinction to make. And there was a series of a couple of points in there that just really, really hit to me. And it was talking about when she had gotten accepted to college and was going off to this great school and stuff, and just the reactions of people and this like very subtle but perceptible like questioning whether you really earned it. That as a white person, if you'd been like, I got into this great college, and someone's like, oh, that's awesome, congratulations, instead of this like slight bit of, oh, did you really deserve that?
Right.
And I just thought that was really powerful. So I want to share that. And then one other link to put in the show notes is called Scaffolded Anti-Racist Resources. And it's kind of a reading list across kind of different levels of kind of understanding racism and understanding your own viewpoint and things on this. And then last thing, well, not last thing for the podcast, we still got more to talk about, but last thing I wanted to say in this little bit is to also try, think about what you can do, and whether that's for you going to a protest or donating to Campaign Zero or Black Lives Matter or something else. I think this is something where we all should have been doing this all along, and kudos to the people who have been. But the fact that this moment is getting big and feels like maybe a turning point for something, like, be part of that and take action to help make it happen, and not let this be another moment that passes.
Yes. Thank you. That is a lot to unpack. I will make this note to myself to put in the show notes some places where you can donate that are reputable and are helpful if donation is something that you can do and that you want to do. A couple things that I do want to address. One, I couldn't agree more about having a broad variety of voices in your ear. I was just watching one of the newest season of Queer Eye came out, and there's a pastor who is out that the guys are helping, or giving him his makeover, and they pointed out, even for a gay man, they're like looking at his literature, and there is no queer literature on his bookshelf. There's no voice for, and that's him for his own voice. So I think it's easy to fall into, I would be embarrassed to say how many books that I've read in my life. I'm sure it's 98% are written by white men, and 1% written by white women, and 1% written by everyone else. And it's easy to fall into those routines and those traps, and just getting a voice, a podcast voice, any other voice in your head is super important. That's why when I teach improv, I'm like, get as many teachers as you can with as many backgrounds as you can, not to equate these two things, but the more voices you hear, whether you agree or disagree with them, the better. Like, you can make your own decisions so much better when you're hearing multiple voices and not watching Fox News or CNN or MSNBC and sticking to one thing. Read international news too, because it's a super interesting take on what's happening in the United States. Because I saw an article, there are people that are looking in at what's happening in the United States and using words like revolution, civil disobedience, and we are getting close to a point where this country might start to tear apart at the seams because of what's happened. And then in regard to
Mike, can I just interrupt and
Sure.
say, again, not equating these things, but I think there's a broader point about, for everybody, part of the reason that, people view others as the other is when you're in a very insular viewpoint. So just across your life, listening to a variety of things, reading a variety of things from a variety of types of authors. And I want to give you a little kudos. When I was out on my walk this morning and had my podcast feed on, and I listened to a couple of your improv tips that you do post the daily ones on the Bit Improv site. And I've set up my like podcast feed. So it like does like a big heavy podcast and then does like, one or two of those as like palate cleanser, like a little quick idea. But one of the ones you posted was about just it, as an improviser, not to close yourself off to certain types of comedy. And like, maybe there's a type of comedy that isn't your favorite, but don't just cut out all of that because you need that diversity of seeing what's working in comedy. So even for something like, yes, less important than, societal justice, but in all these ways, having a diversity of voices that you're hearing one way or another helps. Sorry, back to you.
No, thank you. And then in regard to the kind of posts on social media, I try not to get involved. I try not to make statements, which is probably bad in and of itself, because I don't know how much of a soapbox I have. I just don't think that I think it's pretty pointless to fight on Facebook or Twitter about this stuff, because anyone that's posting aggressively hate-filled things on either one of those platforms is probably beyond hope. But someone I'm friends with on Facebook, who's a police officer, posted a St. Louis, I think, police officer had been shot and killed and murdered. I mean, he had been murdered just like George Floyd has been murdered. And he was like, where's the uproar? Where's the celebrities saying these things? And it was a black man that had killed a white police officer. And I said to him, I'm like, look, I don't want to get into a fight on Facebook, but the problem is there's no question that black man is going to get tried to the utmost extent of the law, and they're going to charge him with, and they're charging him with first degree murder along with a litany of other things. There was no question that was going to happen. And there was a question whether the officer was even going to get arrested for killing George Floyd on video in front of witnesses. And that, to me, both of those men deserve justice. The problem in this country is that George Floyd, there's a question of whether he's going to get it. There's no question in my mind of whether that white police officer is going to get it. And that's a systemic, horrible, embarrassing problem for this country to have. And Kelsey and I were talking about this, and I'm like, how did this country come to this? And she made the point, like, what are you talking about? Come to this. Like, this is what our country was built on, is alien, or is marginalizing and straight up killing and assaulting and dehumanizing people. And it's just such again, we're not a political podcast, but after 8 years of a black man being in office at the highest level of not just the country, but pretty much the world, to think that was such a big step forward for the country, and then to watch what's happened in the past 4 years happening. And I don't mean to, it's a nervous laughter. It's not taking any of the gravity away from this. It's heartbreaking. And if there's anything that we can do, that if you guys send us in, that something we can do, if we have a bigger voice and we need to be using it more, shame on us that we haven't. And we will. We promise that we will do what we can. And like I said, I'll post links to places that you can donate if you want to. It's a frustrating thing. And I guess I'll say it this way, because not only, Mark, I appreciate the fact that you are acknowledging how we can't comprehend. We absolutely cannot comprehend what life is like for a black man in this country or a black woman in this country. Just even thinking about the fact that I'm a man too. In my life, I have maybe was worried for my own safety. I don't know, once, twice, like going for a run at night in maybe an area where I didn't, and frankly, barely even that. I think one time in Vegas, I was at a buddy's bachelor party. I had got separated from the herd, wandered off the strip, and found myself a little inebriated in an area that I shouldn't have been in. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll die. And like, that was like the sarcastic thought in my head that women in this country, that minorities in this country have probably are dealing with this on, if not a daily basis, a weekly basis. I've never been in fear from a police officer. Like at times I've been pulled over. I'm like, oh no, I screwed up. But I was never like, I'm going to get dragged out of my car and shot right now. I was like, I'm going to probably get a ticket. I guess trying to recognize that is important. But I think the people that make these statements and say these things that they just don't understand. There was a good political cartoon I saw where there was the people that don't understand Black Lives Matter. The cartoon showed two houses, one that was on fire and one that was not, and one that was not on fire. And they were spraying the one that was not on fire, I guess, saying, but all houses matter or whatever. It's like, yeah, we get that. But like this group of humans that we are all human beings with has been grossly oppressed by our government and by our people for the entire history of this country. So you can't just pretend that none of that happened. With same concept of affirmative action, people that don't understand how affirmative action works. There was a good cartoon I saw from that. You can't start a race with one racer shackled to a weight and the other one not, and then 20 minutes into the race be like, oh no, we'll just unshackle them, and then that makes it fair again. You have to give some advantage back because it's not fair. Sorry, I'm exhausted of this country and of this whole thing. It's very frustrating.
I saw that same cartoon. The other one I saw that I thought was really good and I unfortunately, a lot of this gets tied into people feeling like their values are attacked and you know, partisan things and stuff like that. And what I saw one that what I liked was I thought it really tried to take this seriously and explain, not like, hey, stop being a fucking idiot, which you could legitimately say to some of these people, but it had this sort of glimmer of hope, which was, you know, someone had like the Black Lives Matter sign and another person's like, I think all lives matter. And the person's like, well, imagine this said like, save the Amazon. I'm not saying other forests don't matter, like burn down the other forests. I'm saying the Amazon is in bigger trouble right now and we need to focus some attention on that. And the other one was like, but I can't change my mind because I'll be hypocritical. And the person's like, no, it'll show you're like a human being with capacity for growth. And then at the end, they're both holding up a Black Lives Matter sign, which I liked.
I think if anyone's struggling with the Black Lives Matter movement and understanding it, that sign does say all lives matter. It's just saying, hey, can you pay a little bit of attention to the people that are being murdered on the streets, that regularly murdered on the streets by government institutions? That it's not, you're right. It's not a one or the other. It's not Black Lives, and it's not even Black Lives Matter more than white lives or more than Asian, more than anyone's lives. It just means, hey, stop fucking killing us in the streets, I think is probably the fair way to put it.
And here again, I feel it's, you know, I'm again feeling it's problematic because it's like, here's us explaining why, you know, what Black Lives Matter should mean, which
sure,
as to white people, I guess the one thing I would say when I was, you know, I thought a lot before we were recording today about how we were going to talk about this. And I guess, part of my suspicion, I don't know if this is accurate or not, is that a lot of people who might be interested in the Twilight Zone and listening to a show where we're talking about 60-year-old Twilight Zone episodes might be our generation or a little bit older and probably skewing white. And, you know, I think there are better forms for you to listen to learn more about this and understand other people's perspective. But if we're the forum you're listening to and this gets some message through to somebody and is helpful to you, then I guess that's accomplishing something. If I could throw out one note of optimism, Mike, going back to what you'd said about our country was, you know, built on this, was absolutely true. I actually saw an interesting post today by somebody, actually a sports writer who I like, Vic Ketchman, and he does a Q&A forum, and somebody had written in something from Britain about like, yeah, we're watching from England and why is there so much violence and stuff in the US? And he was kind of like, well, we imported this from Europe, and remember, you guys are the ones who started bringing slaves over and brought your caste system over and stuff. So hold your horses a little bit.
Yeah.
Which I think was interesting. Going back to your point about how we've been with this, there was a great editorial by or opinion piece by Condoleezza Rice the other day, where, you know, she was talking about how far we have to go and all the problems that still exist and that we need to find a way as a country to move past this, but did, you know, give hope for progress in the sense of said, like, look, I grew up in, you know, in the South in the Jim Crow era, and where if a police officer killed a black man, it wouldn't even mention like a little footnote in the newspaper. And now there's protests about this. Like, yes, we do make progress, but it's really slow and we have to work at it and make it intentional. It's not going to happen accidentally.
Right. And everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction. Comparing that to, you know, what was going on in the era of the Twilight Zone. You know, we talked about in last week's episode, to vaguely bring us back to our supposed topic, that you mentioned that they won an award for, you know, inclusivity and, you know, racial unity. I forget what the specific title was for that episode, for having a black cast in it. And certainly there's huge issues with representation and diversity in television today, but you can't imagine a show like being raised on a pedestal just for they had a black cast in one episode. You know, so again, there is hope and we can make progress as a society, but it tends to be very slow, and it tends to only happen when people really get angry about it and care enough about it to do something about it and make the people in power do something. Which I hope I think there are certainly people out there who are hoping that, you know, this just goes away in a little bit and they don't have to do anything. Which I hope maybe we are hitting that turning point, because now Minneapolis is trying to defund their police department, which is a radical idea, would be interesting to see how that shakes out. I have kind of two more points and then we are overdue for a break already, and we haven't started talking about the episode. So in regard, you made a point a while back about the kind of us addressing certain things. I do hope content creators and people that are still trying to entertain, because if anything, we don't need everyone to turn maudlin all the time at this point, because we still, especially in this time period, we need people to be entertaining us and making us laugh and making us care and making us feel things and creating things that are not everyone needs to. Well, everyone needs to have a message and know that this is unacceptable, and know that Black Lives Matter needs to be supported. Don't turn off what you're doing, though, too. Do your things, continue to create your content, continue to entertain for you entertainers out there. Just be aware of that. The more of a public platform you have, probably the more important it's going to be that you put a message out there. And then the other thought I had that is so heartbreaking to me that this is happening during this time is, as we're watching a virus spread across and kill indiscriminately, it blows my mind that people don't see that people are just people, and that we are not, there is no better or worse. There's no, if anything, the COVID-19 could be the great leveler and just kill people of any, you know, economic status, of any color, religion, any of that stuff, sex. So just another thought I had, that I would have thought that would have brought us together to unite against a common enemy, but instead this is happening. Well, although if I can, I totally agree with this sentiment. If I can push back a little bit on the specific facts on the ground, like it is killing, it affects people indiscriminately. Like, it doesn't care what your race or socioeconomic status or anything else is. But in the US, it is certainly hitting communities of color and lower income far harder. And a lot of that has to do with, to the best of my knowledge, and as we should always say with anything about the science of COVID-19, like, the science is still catching up because it is novel. But to the best of my knowledge, there's no studies at the moment that are showing that in terms of the virus itself, how it affects people has much of a difference based on race or ethnicity. There do seem to be some gender effects potentially, although those are a little hard to suss out based on the data they have right now, and also because it's unclear whether those effects are biological or cultural. So, for instance, in some countries where men are far more likely to smoke than women, their
being affected differently, but they're not sure if it's because of the men versus women or because of smoking versus not smoking.
Right.
But I do think it's worth noting that, like a lot of things, this is hitting people on the lower end of the income scale, and frankly, the African American population harder than it is hitting the rest of us. And that, again, has to do with societal choices we've made about how our economy is set up, and in particular, how our healthcare structures are set up, and also how decades and history of where people have lived and where people can afford to and are allowed to live have shaped what our communities look like. So it is discriminatory in that sense.
Well, yeah. And I do appreciate, like, when Julie Louis-Dreyfus had breast cancer, she made a big point about how I am only going to very clearly successfully recover from this because I am affluent. When Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson had COVID, I know they were in Australia, I think, at the time, but they were like, we're getting the best possible medical care. We're going to be fine. But you're absolutely right. And that's, of course, a huge failing of the American medical system, which is for another podcast. So let's take a break.
Okay, welcome back to Deja Reviewed. And as has been more and more common lately, we are spending more of our time on non-Twilight Zone related topics. In fact, I was telling Mike before we were recording that we need to change our sort of blurb about what the show is, that it's not just discussing the Twilight Zone, it's discussing current events and politics and pop culture and such. But since we spent 36 minutes on current events, as Mike had said, it is important for us to all keep doing our work. And if you find this podcast entertaining, we want to provide you with what you would expect us to talk about, some which is this episode. So Mike, let me bring us back to this episode.
Just skip to minute 48 when we actually talk about the episode.
No, I think it's really important to have listened to the earlier stuff. And I want to, as our segue back in, Mike mentioned the police in there, and this opening scene I did find obviously very relevant to the current situation, but also kind of humorous in the just sort of exaggeratedness of it that seems less humorous in the current situation. But the cops don't even like stop and get into a shootout with him. Like, they pull around the corner and it's almost like mobsters. Like, one of the cops is like leaning out the window, shooting at this guy running.
Yeah.
And then he starts shooting back and they shoot him and he falls down which was very interesting because he took apparently a bunch of shots to the back as he was like trying to climb this fence. Our hero, Rocky, hero is the weird word, but our main character, Rocky, takes a bunch of hits, no bullet holes, no blood, but like lots of spasming as he's acting. And the other thing I wanted to say about this beginning is, for somebody who's a career criminal, Rocky doesn't seem very good at it. Like, if you've been robbing jewelry stores your whole life, you would think you have some sort of strategy. And we see this in movies all the time when they're like doing a heist and they have their plan, or like, okay, you'll have this long till the cops show up. Like, he's in there very leisurely robbing the store, waits till he hears the sirens, then like packs up his stuff. He was in the back of the store, so then like has to go out to the front, climb over the counter. And then of course the cops are there by the time he gets out. I'm like, wouldn't you grab the stuff, just grab everything, throw it in your bag and leave, or grab the stuff, get to the front. So if you hear anyone coming, you can like grab your stuff and get out the door. Like, he did not think this through.
Well, the opening narration calls Rocky this guy that he's always had a hard time and he's always had a hard time. Rocky, to me, struck me as the type of person that just always complains about having a hard time, but is really just a lazy asshole. He's one of the least likable characters. I know we always like to judge our likability of our main characters. He's one of the worst, I think, that we've seen so far. He especially pissed me off because Mr. Pip, who is kind of his, whatever the hell equivalent of guardian angel is, but Mr. Pip reminded me of my uncle who passed away when I was in high school, who is an actor. And Rocky kept calling him Fats, and then he shoots him in the head, or he tries to shoot him in the head. So Rocky is, I don't know if he's ahead of Walter from the Escape Clause, but he is up there with my least likable characters of all time.
Yeah, he's definitely a jerk. I had the same thinking, and I actually did kind of stop and think after I was finished with the episode, like, okay, where does he rank relative to Escape Clause? And I have to say, the guy from Escape Clause, what's his name? Was
Walter,
he also Walter?
Walter Bedecker or something like that, I think.
Okay, that sounds right. Whatever the guy's name from Escape Clause is, perhaps Walter Bedecker. I think that guy still takes the cake, although Rocky is certainly unlikable. And I think the reason why is Rocky is just sort of like generally a rude, obnoxious person. And Walter like takes it to the extreme of like being rude to everybody for no reason instantaneously. True. And then also when we have the one moment where we might have had some sympathy for him when his wife accidentally dies, shows no emotion or care for it. Whereas we had the sense that Rocky maybe had some potential that he could have had some emotion for somebody in a better situation. And Walter was just bad to the bone.
Yeah.
So that was where I put them on the gradation. But certainly if you want to argue that Rocky is not at all likable, I will make no argument with that.
So in the trivia section of IMDb, they tried to cast Mickey Rooney for Rocky's role. And then they were thinking of putting Serling in Rocky's role. And I wonder how that would have played if Serling played. This is the second time we would have seen Serling in the Twilight Zone, and he ends up playing one of the most despicable characters ever. That would have been an interesting choice.
Well, and then first time as a character, right? Because the first time we saw him was the one where he comes on at the end of the episode before Mirror Image.
And lectures us.
Yeah, that would have been that. I think that would have been weird casting. I thought the guy they cast was good in the role.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
he did a fine job with it. Did you also make any connection? So two things I'll say. One, Pip, who is let's just say guardian angel, because that's essentially what he's being portrayed as for the first portion of the episode. When he first shows up, I got a vibe of Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life. And I'm not sure why, because they're dressed differently. They look different. They talk different. And I think it's because like I actually got the vibe before we even see his face. When he first sort of enters the show, we see his shoes because we're down on the ground with Rocky after he's been shot. And then it sort of tilts up to reveal the rest of Pip. And when I very first saw his shoes, I immediately was feeling like Clarence. And I think maybe it was just because it was clear that Rocky was dead and this was going to be some sort of afterlife. So I was thinking guardian angel, and that's sort of my mental image. And you know how much I hate It's a Wonderful Life. But I thought that was a weird one connection I made. And then the other one, to tie it back to escape clause, is maybe anytime like a portly man who is going to give you what you ask for appears, people in the Twilight Zone should be worried, because we've seen it twice now and they both were the devil.
We should compile a list of Twilight Zone characters. Don't get into any spacecraft. Don't listen to portly men that give you things that you want. There's always a monkey's paw. Yes, all of these things.
Don't get married.
Don't get married. Yes. Don't read. There's a lot of stuff. So in addition to the issues that we've already discussed with the cop problems, this might have been top 5 bad portrayals of women in this episode, because Rocky's afterlife is he's winning at gambling all the time, and he wants any, whatever he calls them, dames, broads. Literally, these women are objects because Mr. Pip just creates them as part of his world. So it was a very problematic depiction of women just as objects in Rocky's hell.
Yeah, although I'll say this one didn't bother me as much as many of the others, because it is so clear that we were getting Rocky's perspective, that was how he saw women. And in this, particular version of hell, whatever he imagined was going to be created. So they were objects, but they were where many of the other episodes have been problematic is the women are just there as objects or plot devices and not given personalities, but are existing in the same real world as the rest of us and just apparently not deemed important enough to give personalities and characters to. In this case, they were actually objects, and really the men, were the same way. Every other character we saw is just an object created by Pip as part of Rocky's world. So it bothered me less than this. And I thought it told us something about Rocky himself, what he's asking for. If I first thought I was, in heaven and could kind of get anything I want, yes, I would like some companionship, but he doesn't like, I want like a great girl or something really interesting. He's like holding his hands in front, like miming boobs, like I need a stacked girl.
Yeah.
That's what he asked for.
Yes.
Which tells you something about his, his character. While we're thinking of the things he was asking for, I found it very weird that one of the first things he asked for the girl, and he asked for $1 million. And at this point in the episode, he already knows he's at least been told by Pip that he can get anything he asks for. If that's true, money becomes valueless, right? The only reason you don't acquire money because like, man, I really like holding on to this $20 bill. You acquire it because like, I could buy something that I want with this $20 bill. And so like, why ask for $1 million instead of just asking for like, I want a nice car or a new house or whatever you would buy with the $1 million. I just thought that was funny and it made sense. I thought it worked with, we don't think of Rocky as a terribly educated or smart person. That kind of is the thing he would ask for. But it reminded me of the Simpsons episode, because every episode has to remind us of Simpsons, where Homer's like digging through the couch hoping to find a peanut, and he finds $1. He's like, oh, I wanted a peanut. And his brain's like, you could use that $1 to buy many peanuts. Like, explain how. Money can be exchanged for goods and services. Like, yeah. I feel like that would be Rocky. Like, oh, I found, he'd be the reverse. Like, oh, I really wanted $1 million. And instead I found, the house I was going to buy with $1 million.
Well, and I think that was kind of the point of the episode, though. I mean, like all the stuff that was easy gave him no joy. I mean, always winning at gambling gave him no joy. Obviously, just having the money readily available at any point. I mean, like you said, part of the reason that we like money is we've earned money and we can use money to get other stuff. If everything's just available, the whole message of this thing was that he's in hell because he's bored by everything. About the money, I will point out also from the trivia that he asked for $5,000 bills. Those were last printed in 1945, but they would have still been in circulation in 1960.
Well, I have never seen $1,000 bill.
$5,000 bill.
A $5,000 bill.
Yeah, I don't know about $1,000.
Well, those I have in my wallet right now.
Yeah,
$1,000 bill I've never seen.
That's what he had specifically requested of Mr. Pip. And did you recognize any characters that we've seen in the Twilight Zone before, by any chance?
Like a particular actor?
Nope. I'll just tell you. The slot machine was the same one that was used in...
Oh no, The Fever?
The Fever, yes.
I did make a note when he went to the slot machine. I'm like, please don't let this be The Fever again. I did not notice it was the same one. They should have followed after him. Rocky.
Yeah, Rocky. And one other thing I would like to point out that's applicable in this time period, the end of this episode reminded me a little bit of People Are Alike All Over, when he realizes he's locked into this sort of quote unquote ideal house, but he can't leave. With this, what we're going through with the shelter at home and everyone feeling trapped, however, 80, 85 days, whatever we are into this at this point.
It's the apocalypse.
Right. When he goes to get himself out, when he realizes he's in hell, which by the way, the Mr. Pip's like maniacal laugh when he actually finds out he's in hell was as perfectly melodramatic as it should have been. But it just reminded me of...
I thought that may have been the worst end of an episode we have ever seen in the Twilight Zone.
We did the the purple fever. What's that one?
That last scene was absolutely the worst thing we've seen.
Yes.
I didn't even count that one because it was so disconnected from the rest of the episode. But yeah, just like Pip laughing maniacally, and it just sort of like tilts up and away from him. Throw out two notes about the actor who played Rocky. One is he has some legit dancing skills that I didn't expect out of a career low-life criminal. And I was wondering if maybe that was something, I mean, obviously the actor had some dancing skills, but I would have thought it was weird today if like somebody who had just been robbing banks or jewelry stores and was just a career criminal suddenly turned out to be a decent dancer. I was wondering if maybe that was something in the 60s that was just more common. Kind of everybody learned growing up how to dance. And he even does when he's coming out of the casino, he does a great little like prospector kick, where you sort of like, I don't know what you call it, but both legs go up and click your heels together. And it was a really like, he got some hang time, clicked them together very nicely and landed right back on his feet. I mean, this guy had some control of his physical body in a very impressive sort of way, even if I didn't think it fit the character.
Well, wasn't Frank Sinatra and the rest of the Rat Pack career criminals that were all good at dancing? I mean, if we're going to go down that route.
Oh man, I'm not going to go down that route. You're welcome to. Send your hate mail from all you Frank Sinatra lovers too.
So I don't have much left to say about this episode. We've talked about I think the social issues that are part of this episode, but that's about all I had. There wasn't that much, like you said, about the episode itself that interested me a ton.
I guess you may bring this to one higher level, and yeah, I don't have a ton else left to say. Thinking kind of big picture with this, I think there's a connection between last week's episode and this one. You remember Bully had his whole speech in The Big Tall Wish about how the world beats you down and you can't maintain your innocence or belief in magic. And Rocky seemed like someone coming out of the same world, where, I agree with you. He seemed like he was also kind of lazy and not particularly bright, but also seemed like, somebody who had learned the lessons and been beaten down by the world and maybe didn't get some opportunities. Certainly was not coming from a place of privilege that some other people have. So I thought that was interesting that we had those two episodes back to back. And I don't know if that reflected kind of a place Serling was at or a question he was wondering about at the time.
Well, if I can just interrupt for one second, that makes it an interesting connection between the two of those, because we discussed about how he made Bully even though he had this black cast, he made him kind of like a lesser a physical role instead of making an astronaut or a scientist or something like that. So this is a good look for Serling, that Bully's reaction to being kicked around his whole life is just to try to keep rising up and just keep trying to fight back and find the levels of success or fame that he had. Whereas this guy's reaction to getting kicked around is to turn to a life of crime and just be a horrible person. So, I mean, maybe that's a better look for Serling, that the white character did turn to the crime. It certainly would have looked much worse if they flipped the two actors between those two episodes.
Absolutely. And to continue with the connections between him and Bully, one of the things I mentioned that I really liked about him, and again said I want to see the drama about him where it wasn't a Twilight Zone episode, and you astutely noted, well, it really wasn't a Twilight Zone episode. There was a scene where Rocky had kind of more self-awareness and thoughtfulness than I expected from him, which granted was a very low bar because most times I'm pretty dumb, but he's smart enough to realize, like, he kind of questions Pip, like, why am I here? I should have been in the other place, because he still thinks he's in heaven. And I'd be curious for your thoughts, Mike, and maybe we'll talk about this when we do our star ratings, about how soon you knew how this was going to wrap up, because I thought this was a super predictable episode. But he has this scene where he's like, but you know what? When did I do anything good? And he's like, well, I must have done something really good that was so good that counteracted all the bad things that I had done. And he's trying to think of what it could be. And he's like, well, when did I do something good? And I'm with him on, if you really had done a lot of bad things, you're trying to think, what could I have done that's so good it would have countered those? That could be hard to think of, and like what would have done it. But it also seemed like he was having a hard time thinking of anything good he had ever done, which is a pretty sad commentary on him. But I like that he asked the question, and he actually leaves all his objectified women and money in the suite to I want to go to the Hall of Records and see my file and figure out what happened, which I thought was an interesting twist that the story itself didn't really need. It didn't need to have Bully Rocky. I want to watch Bully again. He's more interesting than Rocky. It didn't need to have Rocky have that sort of thoughtfulness about how he was here and what that meant, but it was interesting and made his character a little deeper to have that, I thought.
Well, in answer to your question, I agree with you that this was a very predictable episode. I definitely remembered this episode from my first viewing, so that's a little spoiled by that. I think thinking back to my first viewing, I knew that pretty early on, whereas, and I can't believe I haven't drawn this comparison yet, but The Good Place, which is a phenomenal NBC show, Kristen Bell, Michael Schur wrote it, Ted Danson is amazing in it. It's a great show about, I guess, well, we can spoil the twist of The Good Place because it happens early enough on. So they do find out that what they think is this heaven, they're actually in hell, and literally the exact same reason for Rocky being just bored by everything so immediately is kind of the same theme for The Good Place, that they're put with people that they would not like to be around. And it's a torture of a very attractive looking torture to these people in hell. So it's a interesting, and by the way, another Rod Serling looking at the afterlife episode we've got.
So let me ask this question. This is kind of, I guess, the last thing I wanted to touch on specific to the episode.
Sure.
Is kind of what, and I know that you're an atheist, but for the sake of this thought exercise, imagine that you believe in some sort of an afterlife and a hell or heaven.
Sure.
Whatever form that might take. It's interesting thinking, what would that look like? And that's something that I know philosophers and, religions have thought a lot about and have different answers to. And I think there's a spectrum of approaches to this. Two things that this episode reminded me of that. One was The Simpsons, where Homer goes to hell and for eating the forbidden donut that he had traded his soul for. And the guy's like, so you want donuts, huh? How about eating all the donuts in the world? And then of course the joke is Homer eats them all and like more, and they're like, I'm sorry, we're out of donuts.
Yeah.
Getting everything you want, but he still wanted more. And the other one that I guess more philosophically has got me thinking of was the film What Dreams May Come, which had Robin Williams, and it had the cool visual effect where the like inside paintings. The
painting,
yeah. But the interesting thing there, and I haven't seen this in 20 years, so I apologize if I'm getting the details on this wrong, but I remember there being something about you kind of having this choice for yourself of being in heaven or hell. And if you're in grief and sad and kind of want to wallow in that, you sort of form your own private hell.
Yes.
And Robin Williams goes and like rescues his wife from that. And it reminded me a little bit of the sort of Catholic teaching about heaven and hell, where heaven is sort of like being in the presence of God and the sort of fullness of that. And hell isn't like, a demon torturing you in flames necessarily, but that feeling of absence of God and being separated from and being alone. And so I was curious what you thought about like what this was as a hell and whether it would be effective. Cause I obviously could see where this would get boring, but I was even watching it thinking like, okay, I could think of some things to do that would be interesting. I don't know if for all eternity would keep me entertained, but that don't have to do with just getting whatever I want. Like there's this book I've been meaning to read and I can have the time to read that. And there's, playing some sort of strategy game that's not about do you get to win or lose, but like the act of thinking and strategy. Like there's things I could think of that would make this less hellish.
Well, I was raised Catholic and I was always taught, yes, the idea of hell is more that isolation from God and from people that you love and all that stuff. And that it's like I agree. What Dreams May Come is probably an apt thing, be that total isolation of yourself and your spirit is what I've always thought of it. Whereas the heaven would be the opposite. As I've mentioned multiple times on this podcast, I am not easily bored. So and kudos to Rocky. He must have a very active imagination because he was bored within minutes of getting to heaven or getting to hell, it seemed like. I agree with you. I think, I'm sure there'd be some sort of monkey's paw situation where if you kept, like Homer, if you were able to eat all the donuts, I'm sure in this version of hell, they would figure out a way to make it worse for you. But I think they would have to go to great lengths to bore me into tears in hell. So, but yeah, I've always, again, I was raised Catholic and frankly, the idea of a heaven and hell is super comforting compared to just it's so hard to wrap your mind around the fact that you just aren't going to exist and you won't know that you don't exist and that you just never existed, just like you never knew you were not born yet. So I wish I believed in the idea of heaven and, well, I guess not a hell, but I wish I did believe in the idea of an afterlife because it is comforting. It is more comforting, but I was raised the same way you were.
This seems more comforting than a nothing. And honestly, more comforting than a lot of other visions of hell I've heard. Like I would much rather be in Rocky's hell, if that's where I was going to end up, than Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
I kind of want to be in the hell from Futurama run by the robot devil.
Yes, that one seemed fun. And as Billy Joel said, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than die with the saints. Cry with the saints. I guess they
Fair.
also died.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Do we want to
Let's
close
move on,
this
yeah.
bad boy out?
Yes, let's.
Okay, the closing narration. A scared, angry little man who never got a break. Now he has everything he's ever wanted, and he's going to have to live with it for eternity in the Twilight Zone.
Did this feel like another one?
A little too short.
We saw one a few episodes ago where I was like, yeah, it needed like one more beat rhythmically.
Yeah. But also, there weren't a whole lot of beats in this episode in general, so it was probably enough. This was another, by the way, we didn't point out Serling's narration and closing narration going at our main character a little bit, taking some pokes at him, deservedly. Scared, angry little man.
Yeah, like that. Agreed. Although I think a scared, angry little man is better than Mr. Joe Caswell, who, when the good Lord passed out of conscience, a heart, a feeling for fellow men, must have been out for a beer and missed it.
Yeah.
Or I think the pinnacle of those remains. It's from neither the opening or ending voiceover. It's the one weird like mid voiceover when he's just taunting the character in I Shot an Arrow.
Yeah. He's crawling
like,
up the hill.
you run, you keep climbing because you don't want to think about what you did. Like,
I love that one.
That is a fun one. All right.
Sweat.
I definitely noticed Rocky sweaty at some points. I didn't feel like there was a huge amount of sweat in this episode, but there was some, so maybe like a 3.
That's perfect. We agreed right on the money. I had a 3 as well.
I don't know if that's ever happened on either our sweat or
I don't
our star
think so
ratings
either.
before.
No, but I had a 3 as well because, yeah, I felt like it was noticeable but not distracting. And then, do you want to start us on rating, or do you want to? Oh, remember, sweat is 3 out of 10 because Mark has a very defined scale, and our rating is out of 5.
This is probably going to be another one where I need you to maybe cite some episodes so
Sure.
I can figure out where it fits in with them. But I think off the top of my head, I'm going to say maybe a 2.
You're not going to believe this. That was
Did we
me
agree on that too?
gasping in surprise. Yes.
Holy shit.
I also had a 2, but we can give some context to it.
Yeah, I thought I thought it was well shot and made and put together. I love the visual of the filing cabinets at the top of the
That was
stairs,
neat.
and then when they get up there, and then you see there's like another level above that, and you just kind of had this sense, oh, it must like go on to infinity. I think those were also the stairs from Time Enough at Last.
Oh yeah, I think you're right.
that he's climbing up. So I like the execution of it. I actually liked Pip as a character. I thought he was
great.
fun. It was super predictable. There were no surprises. You knew from very early on, and this is one of those, it's something that I see a lot of times in student scripts and first drafts that then we try to help them improve on, where they're like trying to hide something that's super obvious. And it's like, you either need to do a much better job hiding it, or go ahead and let the cat out of the bag and find something else that's going to be the point of interest for this. But it was very clear he was actually in hell, because he keeps saying like, I must be in like heaven or something. And Pip's like, or something, like
Right.
very suspiciously multiple times.
And along
So
those lines, kind of our refrain for some of these Twilight Zone episodes, yes, it was super predictable, but part of me was like, would this have been super predictable in 1960 time? Because like, I feel like I've seen this concept, and of course with Good Place, done multiple times, but again in 1960 maybe this would have been a little bit more novel or a little bit more fresh of feeling, but again we are watching it in 2020, so you know we have our own experience, and I agree with you. I think it was obvious and not a great twist.
Do you think though it's also worth at this point putting, because I know that's something you've brought up a lot and I think made a lot of sense in certain cases. Do you think at this point it's fair to say, let's assume you're a regular viewer of the Twilight Zone. We're now on episode 28.
True.
And you have to be assuming there's going to be some kind of twist or surprise or something. You know, think about, M. Night Shyamalan and how quickly, it was like movie 3. Everyone's like, okay, what's the big twist going to be?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're looking for from him. And I think by episode 28, a regular viewer of The Twilight Zone would have got this twist pretty quick, seen it coming. Because it's kind of A, the only twist that really could be there, and B, it's really telegraphed. So I would guess now, if it was an audience like this is the first episode of Twilight Zone they've seen, then yeah, maybe 1960, it is a little more surprising. But I think we're almost all the way through the first season. We've already done more episodes than a contemporary season of a TV show would have done.
No, that's true.
So,
and in regard to Shyamalan, it took them that long and then basically to turn on him and be like, okay, what else do you got? So that's a really good point. I didn't, for sure, if you're watching Twilight Zone, frankly, if I just was presented with a show called The Twilight Zone and had that opening, I would be expecting some sort of twist too. So that's a really good point too. Do you want to hear some ratings that are 2s?
Yeah, maybe some 2s, and give us like a 1.5 and a 2.5 to kind of bracket it and make sure we're in the right spot. But the fact that we both agreed is usually encouraging, because usually we're pretty far off.
Yeah. So one of our favorite main characters, Escape Clause, was a 1.5. What You Need, The Four of Us Are Dying, were 1.5. It's also another kind of despicable main character in The Four of Us Are Dying.
And in What You Need, like not the peddler, but the other guy was.
That's right.
So maybe we're just rating things based on whether we like the main character.
Yeah, could be. Well, Hitchhiker was a 2.5, and we liked her just fine.
Yeah, and our 1 5-star. I mean, the guy was a Nazi. So.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know what that says about us. Elegy was a 2.5. Mirror Image, and A World of Difference, and The Big Tall Wish were our 3 2s on the money. I would say this is about there.
I think this sounds right for this. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Big Tall Wish was a 1.5. I take it back. This, I had preemptively put this as a 2. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I feel good with 2 then.
A World of Difference. Did I say that as a 2? And Mirror Image?
What's a 2.5?
2.5. Elegy and The Hitchhiker.
Okay. Yeah. Elegy, I have like negative memories in my head from, because it was so disappointing how it wrapped up. But that one did have a lot of interest in the first half of it.
And Elegy had a lot going on. Like there was a lot of, the Elegy had a lot more going on, I feel like.
Yeah. I feel like this could have been, and probably at some point has been, like a Treehouse of Horror or something.
Yes.
Like done in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, for sure.
I will say this is another one. You mentioned like we've seen other things like this and used The Good Place as an example. This is another one I had not seen this episode before, but I've definitely seen this plot and wonder if they are in fact referencing The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, could be. Okay. Are we ready to guess along what next week's is, Mark?
Let's do it.
Okay. Next week's episode is episode 29 of season 1.
Hey, wait, can I say my guess from last week, because I just listened to a previous episode, was I said I had an astronaut crash landing on someplace. That part was wrong, but someplace where he thinks he wants to stay and then finds out that after he's sort of forced to stay there that there's something wrong that he wouldn't want to stay. So this is definitely not a like dead on, but it was closer than some others.
Yeah, for sure.
I got like a D-. It's a passing grade.
Oh, I think you higher than that. That was a good guess.
There was a monkey's paw.
There was a monkey's paw. There was always a monkey's paw. Next week's episode is titled Nightmare as a Child. Nightmare
Isn't
as
that
a
just
child.
Like being a child? You have nightmares sometimes. Well, I'm going to guess there's a monkey's paw and a child and a nightmare.
Is it a child monkey or a adult monkey?
Okay, nightmare as a child, you said?
Nightmare as a child.
Okay. I'm going to guess it's an adult who like has been having the same nightmare since he's been a kid, and some part of it starts to come true.
Ooh, that's a little bit like the one with the carnival.
Perchance to Dream.
Perchance to Dream.
I was thinking.
Nice.
And there's a monkey's paw.
And there's of course. I would just have that be a running thing.
And if the devil shows up, it's a portly white man.
Well, thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. As we said, next week's episode is episode 29 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled Nightmare as a Child. It can be found on US Netflix. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. You can also find us at DejaReview.com, where you can send us a voicemail or a text message. We hope you tune in next week.
Deja Review.